In this NVivo 12 for Mac demonstration video, we're going to do some management of our case classifications that we've created previously. We've got one case classification here for students, and you can see we've created a case for each student in our data set. If I double click on student, we can see here are the attributes. For each student, we've coded from our classification sheet what their ELL status is, their ethnicity, gender, language status, school, teacher, and so forth. What we want to do now is to think about what happens once we have a classification inside of NVivo. What if we need to make some changes to that? So, for example, what if we decide that we need to add an attribute to the classification after it's already inside of NVivo? For example, we have the school here. What if we realize that the schools in this district are clustered together into the eastern part of the county and the western part of the county, and in some way that makes a difference in the experiences that students might have. So what if I want to add a school cluster attribute to my classification sheet? In order to do that, I'm going to come over to the student classification. I'm going to right click it. I'm going to use the pop-up box to choose new attribute. And then I'm going to type in by the name school cluster. In order to create the values, I'm going to come to the bottom of the attribute values box. I'm going to click the plus and I'm going to type in the name West. I'm going to create a second one, type in the name East, and then I'm going to say done. Now you see that we have an additional attribute called school cluster. In order to actually add those values, however, we would have to go into each data file. So for example, we would have to go into look in the classification sheet, and we can show that that new attribute exists. Usually it goes to the very end, and here it is, school cluster. So now we have Adiola, but it says unassigned. So we would click the magnifying glass and we'd perhaps choose East. So we'd have to go in and assign manually, whereas, of course, if we had put that in our classification sheet to begin with, it would have all come in together with the rest of the data. We'd come to the student classification, and we look in detail view at the attributes column. We would find the attribute that we'd like to rename. For example, perhaps I have school, and I really would like to say building here. So I'm going to right-click on it. I'm going to say Get Info. And the name box comes up in the attribute properties box, and I could just type in building, click done, and now it's titled building instead of school. Another kind of addition that might happen is after we import our classification sheet, we might have some additional students. So for example, we might decide that we need to add one student whose name is Debbie to the classification. To do that, I would right-click on the student classification. In the pop-up box, I would choose New Case. So we've got Case Properties. Under Name, we're going to put Debbie. I could put a description if I'd like to do that. Classification is Student. And now I have an opportunity to assign the proper values. So Building, we're going to click the magnifying glass. I'm going to choose the correct building, AG, for ELL status, and so forth. So I can use the Case Properties box to assign the values to the Debbie node. Another way to do that, you see the Debbie node has appeared here in list view. So if I looked in the classification sheet, we should see Debbie. Here's the Debbie case. I could also work across here to finish assigning the values. So for example, language was not yet assigned. It still says unassigned. I'm going to click the double click the magnifying glass, and English is the home language. Once you've created a classification sheet and maybe added to it, you may decide that you want to export that, and you could use it again in SPSS, or you could export to a program like Excel. So the way to do that, if we wanted to export this classification sheet to work with it in other programs, we would come up to the Data tab, into the Export group, and you see Classification Sheets. We would give it a title. We'll leave the title as is, Classification Assignments Student, and then it's going to ask me what kind of format. I'm going to save it in .csv and tell it it's going to go out to my desktop and tell it OK.